We've got a lot of great questions today. The main one is on tents and sleeping arrangements for soldiers in the 18th century. Thanks for joining us today on Questions and Answers. The first question comes today from the Making Beeswax Candle video. This is Evan Merson, and he says, can you use tallow instead of beeswax? Tallow is cheaper for me once the beeswax runs out. As I understand, beeswax was more expensive for common people in the colonies in colonial America, so I want to be historically accurate. Tallow was a very common thing for inexpensive candles to be made of in the 18th century. But you want to make sure that you're using not animal fat, like muscle fat, but the kidney fat or suet part that we call it sometimes. Sometimes it's referred to as tallow. But you want very, very hard fat to use in your candles. And one of the problems with it in a candle mold situation like this video that he's referring to, it can be sticky. And it can be also, it might not grip the wick hard enough to let you pull the candle out. So again, you're going to have the some of the same kind of issues you have with the beeswax, getting them out of the mold. You might have to pour warm water over the mold, but that trick where you push the candle in a little bit might help too. So yes, go ahead, try tallow. Make sure to get the hardest fat available. On the Jumbles video, Tracy Sheppard says, can this be made over an open fire? She would love to make these, but she doesn't always have the bread oven fired up. So can you make them over an open fire? Yes, with the right tools. You can make these. These will easily be made in a Dutch oven. And you could also use one of the tin biscuit bakers, sort of like a little reflector oven. Both of those tools will make it so that you can bake something like this. I haven't any idea how you would do it with anything other than that. This question came in on the Washing the Dishes episode by Rick Smith. He asks, I have to ask, guess I haven't paid close enough attention, but are you part of a group or something that does public demonstrations at some historic colonial reenactment settlement? It's something I'd love to come and see sometime. I don't do any public demonstrations. Everything we do is for YouTube here, doing videos for our website and for YouTube in general. I run James Townsend & Son, which is a company that sells 18th and 19th century reproductions to historical reenactors, to movies and historic sites. So that's why we're doing this thing. Here's a question that came in on the Fresh Sauerkraut episode. It's by Brian Ruff. He says, could you add a small dollop of yogurt as a starter culture for the lactobacillus in this sauerkraut? The deal is that this cabbage comes in with all the starter it needs. It's native to the cabbage plant itself, so you really don't need any kind of starter culture. It's already built into the cabbage. This question came in on the last Q&A. It's from Virginia Bradley. She says, very astute answers, Ivy and John. And then she goes on, and her question down here is, what areas of reenacting besides cooking are you interested in doing? And she's asking the question of Ivy. I don't have Ivy here with me today, but I'll answer for her. Right now, she's very interested in the medicine parts of reenacting, basically because her sister is a paramedic and she likes the idea of mixing the idea of modern day medicine and historical medicines. My favorite current story about Ivy and historical things is somebody asked her what her celebrity crush was, the person she liked the most out there in the world. Her celebrity crush was George Washington. This question comes from probably the first boiled pudding episode we did. It's zesty, and the question is butter the best substitute for suet in these old world recipes? We have tried. In fact, in that recipe, or in those boiled puddings, I used butter. We tried, Crisco or other kind of vegetable shortening things. There just really isn't a good substitute for suet. Suet really is the best product to use in these, and there isn't a good modern substitute except for like a Torah vegetable suet, and really that isn't as good at all either. So You can still make these without suet. They just really aren't quite the same, though. They don't get nice and broken up and have those little pockets in them. This question comes in from the baking bread in an earthen oven video, the one that happens right after the earthen oven video, the very first one we did. It's Dave Cully. He says, thank you for the great video. I got Kiko Denzer's book out of the library yesterday, so it was interesting to compare your method to his. That is a very good book on making earthen ovens. One question. How many times did you have to load fresh wood in onto the fire during heating? And approximately how much wood is required to get the oven up to heat with the dimensions that we were working with? This is a really difficult question to answer. We haven't measured precisely as we've fired these ovens. Really, we just keep feeding that fire until we know it gets to the right heat. It might take, an hour or two, it might take 3 hours, depending on the oven, the temperature it is outside, and how good the wood is, and how nice and dry the wood is that you're using. So really, it doesn't take a lot of wood, but there's so much difference in the kind of wood you're going to use that I really can't give a good precise answer. The thing is to keep that fire going, keep it a nice hot fire, and watch for that soot turning to ash on the oven so that you can see when the oven is up to heat. Here's an interesting question. It came in on the last Q&A. He says, it's Benjamin Grist. He says, hey, John and Ivy, I have a quick question about tricorn hats. I did some research and found out that they became popular because it allowed men to show off their wigs. However, looking at several period paintings, I've seen many commoners wearing tricorn hats without wigs. Was my research mistaken, or is there another another explanation for this? I think there's a couple different explanations for it. But the main idea here is that a fashion can be started for a particular reason, but that reason goes away, but the fashion doesn't necessarily go away. So, maybe tricorn hats started because they wanted to show off their wigs, but once it became fashionable to wear that kind of hat, it really didn't matter whether you were trying to show off your wig or not. Tricorn hats were the kind of hats to wear, so that's what everybody wore. It didn't really matter. When it comes to this idea of distinguishing wigs from hair, that's trickier. In painting, it's hard to tell whether or not sometimes that's real hair or that's someone's wig. And in some places, like North America, wearing your real hair instead of wearing a wig was a bit more common than you're going to find in Great Britain. So there's a couple different answers to that question. This little tidbit came in on the imitation coffee. This is Bob Spencer, and he said, and he gives me a little clipping from a newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, in 1765, and at the end of that little quote, this place that's selling coffee and chocolate, it says, and rye done in an imitation of coffee in the best manner. Very interesting. Rye being used also as imitation coffee. And we had so many other great comments about other cultures using roasted grains in coffee-like drinks. And of course, we have things like postum and, dandelions and chicory. I don't have the answers to some of those about how far back those can be traced, what kind of good time frame references we can pull out to kind of place those in history. If you've got research about how far back chicory goes or dandelion root, I would love to see it, just like this reference here. Thank you, Bob Spencer, for sending that in. And here's the main question. It comes from Jackson Silky. He was asking on the last Q&A. He says, in the 18th century, what did soldiers sleep on in their tents, and what kind of tents did they have? The vast majority of typical soldiers in the 18th century were sleeping in a regular wedge tent. They were typically about 6.5 feet square on the ground. Some of them were, different depending on the country and, what time frame within the 18th century we're talking about, but generally. And many of those tents were called six-man tents. So they would squeeze 6 guys into a tent that only had a floor space of 6.5 foot square. And they would sometimes sleep head to toe. So it would be, 6 people put in like sardines in a can. I cannot imagine what that would have been like, sleeping with 2 pairs of feet right beside your head, and especially during the American Revolution, tents were in short supply at different places in different parts of the war. In the Southern campaign, they had tents, maybe one tent for every 20 guys or 12 guys. So many times people were sleeping out in the weather. Joseph Plum Martin talks about being on the march and having to sleep in the rain without tents, and he had to keep his gun dry, so you'd sleep with your gun between your legs, right there on the ground in the rain. I can't imagine it. I don't even want to try that out. And the question is, what did they sleep on in their tents? Right on the ground. They were probably lucky to have a blanket, and that's it. There was no, they may have occasionally had straw or something like that to sleep on, but more than likely, the vast majority of the time, they were just sleeping right on the ground. We have got so much stuff going on right now. Kevin's just working on the catalog, and it's going to be really different this year. So look out for that. And we've got other big projects that I'm working on specifically. So stay tuned for the things that we're going to be doing here in the very near future. I really want to thank everyone out there for your great, wonderful questions and comments. They are all so very helpful. One last thing, we are working really hard on this mailing list for our YouTube channel to make it easier to kind of connect with you guys. And as a special bonus for signing up, there'll be a special little thank you video that you'll want to see, something a little different. So there's going to be a link down in the description section of this video that will take you to a spot where you can sign up for that. So please go and do that. Thank you so much for watching. If you're a new viewer and you haven't subscribed, press the subscribe button up here. That'll take you to a spot where you can subscribe. I want to thank everyone for watching.